Okay, good afternoon to everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're joining from. We still have a few people logging in, so we're going to give them a minute or two to get settled and then we'll get underway.
Like we need wait music or something.
Yeah, I know. I'm just going to pop up the slides so we've got something to look at. There we go. Okay, just give it one more minute for people to join. All right, I think we'll kick it off. Let's do it. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar. This one's facilitated by RMIT Online, Disrupt Your Thinking with Design Thinking. In today's webinar, our guest speakers, Dr. Kevin Argus and Sarah Nally, will explore what design thinking is, how its methodologies are being applied by well-known brands, and how you can learn more about how to use it in your own business practice through RMIT Online's MBA program. Before I introduce our two speakers, I just want to cover off some housekeeping. Just going to see that. Okay, so today's webinar is being recorded. We'll be able to share a link with you after the event is complete, and we welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it, of course, with your colleagues and friends. Throughout the session, we invite your comments and questions, so please look out for the Q&A chat box on your screen at the bottom. If you do think of a question for the speakers at any point, just type it in there and we'll do our best to answer it in our live Q&A at the end of the session. So at the end, we'll have 10 minutes for any questions pertaining to design thinking or any of the topics covered today. We also have a student advisor from RMIT Online here with us today. So again, if you've got any questions on the MBA, we've got Avi on standby to help out with that. So we'll get stuck into it and introduce today's guest speakers. So we've got Dr. Kevin Argus and Sarah Nally. Kevin is RMIT's program manager and senior lecturer in design thinking and marketing. He is a part of a collective of academics focused on designing human-centered approaches to the circular economy. So repurpose, reuse, and recycle. The current industry partner research within the construction industry is informing social impact to achieve sustainable social outcomes for Indigenous, women, and disability workers. He also leads an industry engagement project within RMIT's School of Business and Law, taking design innovation ideas and storytelling to showcase real-world industry impact. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Fern.
We also have Sarah Nally with us today. So Sarah is the General Manager of Design at NZ Bank ASB and a design thinking coach. She's on a mission to help us all discover the power of human-centered design in business and in life. She has co-founded various innovative ventures, including the event series Wide for Wonder and online shoe business Sienna Baby. At the center of her drive, Sarah finds purpose in helping people unlock their wonder mindset and reach their full potential so that they can become more productive, efficient, engaged, and creative in all aspects of life. So welcome, Sarah. Okay, now I'm going to hand over the floor to you, Kevin, who's going to kick off the design thinking discussion. Go for it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Fern, and welcome, Sarah. And welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to be presenting to you today on design thinking. Design thinking is a topic that I'm quite passionate about. It's certainly integral in our MBA program. And there's never been, I think, a more important time in the context of where we're at existentially as a society, in terms of where we're at, in terms of the challenges that we face, both in business and existentially in the world. Design thinking is certainly an approach that can assist businesses and organizations to address some of these challenges. So what I want to do is just kick off by giving you a little bit of context about how design thinking came into the program. So back in about 2013, at the Graduate School of Business and Law, we were looking at basically reimagining our MBA program. And we were basically starting an accreditation journey. And at that time, design thinking certainly was gaining gravitas. We were noticing that in industry. It certainly was clearly apparent in some of the leading MBA programs in the US that they were starting to embed design thinking in their programs. And so we were one of the first in Australia to embed that and make that a benchmark of our MBA program. So some of the, I guess some of the context around that, why we thought that was a good idea, were things like digital innovation and the exponential rise of digital innovation, faster product development life cycles, the need for a diverse lens on designing so that design became a more effective process and was servicing the needs of communities more effectively. So we basically embedded this skill set within the course. And then in about 2018, we launched MBA online, RMIT Online MBA. And it basically mirrors the MBA that we have on campus face-to-face. And then what we decided to do was to build out some minor specializations. And one of those is design thinking. Now we've got Sarah Nally with us here tonight, which is terrific. And Sarah worked with us in the development of that minor, Sarah being an exponent of design thinking, somebody who's a thought leader in that space and has broad practice experience, both consulting in design thinking and also working with large financial institutions. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce Sarah to you. And what we might do, Sarah, is kick off and address some of these fundamental questions that that people might have around design thinking, because we know it's certainly a skill set and a process that's been around for a while. I'm interested to tap into your thoughts about what it is, why it's important, how is it applied, and its currency today. So I thought we might kick off with a basic question. From your perspective, what is design thinking?
Oh, it's such a good question. Well, it is a process, absolutely. But I think when you use it a lot, you realize that it's more than just a process. It's a mindset, and it's a way of thinking differently about problems and making sure that you're solving the right problem, not getting sort of too narrowed in too quickly. So it ends up being a number of different things. It becomes a toolkit, it becomes a process, and it becomes a way of living if you end up like us, Kevin.
So I would be saying to my students, it's like a framework for innovation that places the people we're designing for at the center of the design process. And I guess in that context, as you say, it's very much a process rather than just a kit for finding solutions. It's about going through that journey, isn't it?
And the funny thing, your definition is obviously better than mine because you're the doctor. But the funny thing is, it is a process and it needs to be a discipline, because actually naturally we don't put people at the center. Naturally we get pulled in other directions, particularly in business. And so this is a lovely discipline or practice, and that's why we kind of call it a design practice within ASB, at making sure that you continually put the customer at the center of what you're doing and go back to that and really keep connecting in with that and get very disciplined about it.
And I'm just on that, how do you put the customer at the center of that design process, say in the context of ASB, because it's a large bank, so it's got a consumer base that's probably quite diverse across New Zealand. How do you capture, I guess, insights around those customers?
We've got some cool stuff. We've got a really great voice of customer program where we capture real feedback from our customers. And then we've got our design processes, including our 10x the CX. We call it our innovation process, which is an application of design thinking that really brings customers into, and we talk about going from designing for a customer to designing with a customer. And that for me is like the dream state, when you're actually involving a customer in the whole experience. I always love that little Simpsons episode, you know, when Homer goes off and designs his car. I always think of that one when you're thinking of design. What can happen if a customer just goes off and designs it themselves is that it could be, you know, way too expensive and too out there, etc. Keeping close to business and navigating the tensions of feasibility, viability, and desirability means that you get that sweet spot between, you know, the customer's needs, the business's needs, and what is actually going to be something that's going to be able to be achieved. So I often say designing is all about navigating tensions.
And I think that's a really interesting one too, because if you're looking in the context of a business context, you've got a broad overview in terms of corporate strategy, and then you might have at the at the various units of the organization, they've got their own particular strategies in alignment. There's various KPIs, and we know that organizations historically tend to bias a bit towards return on investment measures that are very numbers focused, rather than bringing in some of these other sort of measures. So we'll get on to that a little bit later, I guess, in the discussion in terms of unpacking some of this. What do you see as in terms of this process? How do you see this process as providing advantage or value in the design of new things? So you develop products and services for customers and what have you. So how does this process actually work to assist?
You've mentioned bias. I think one of the most effective things that the design process does is actually check your bias and make sure that you're not just designing something that you love. You're actually designing something that not only your customers are going to love, but that works as well. So I sort of consider that as being one of the important aspects.
Okay, and you mentioned designing with as opposed to designing for, and I think that is a key point there. So we talk about design thinking as a process being iterative as well. So there are many phases where it's going backwards and forwards between the end user and the design team. Can you give any examples of how that plays out and how you balance how much you invest in that? At what point do you need to just cut sort of a line in the sand and say we've got to go with something?
We've got a lovely story that's coming out, and we'll be able to share a video. So you'll have to keep an eye on my LinkedIn in the next few weeks. But around our cards, our recent development of our credit card, and I think that's a lovely one because it's real, it's tangible, it's something physical that people can actually interact with. And we'd actually gone on a journey for a couple of years in actually working with our factory and knowing we were changing a provider, and there was opportunities to redesign. And I had been in the seat of the GM of design for a hot minute when someone said to me, are these aligning to the design principles? And they weren't. So we actually went back to the drawing board, firstly to align to our design principles, and then we brought them to customer and got them to test them. And we had one of those really lovely moments that really validates the value of the design process when we took it to our low vision customers and got them to play with what we were talking about in terms of some of the accessibility features that we were hoping would work. And they were kind of reading these accessibility dots, which have become really on trend for banks these days to have these accessibility dots so a customer knows which way to put a card into a machine, etc. And they were trying to read them and they were like, what does this even say? And, you know, silly vision people had just put dots rather than actually thinking about what those could be saying. And so we ended up changing ours to Braille, which was a really nice little kind of shift. And then the next kind of shift was that we actually made the cards biodegradable. And so we've got a degradable plastic card now. So little features along the way that maybe cost a little bit more to do, but that kind of made it a better product at the end of the day. And as you know, when you design for others, it ends up making it more accessible to a bigger kind of crowd. And so, yeah, some of those accessibility features have tested really well with our customers.
And that is a theme that I'm finding across a number of stakeholders now, this idea of, and I know you've got design principles and inclusiveness, these
Yes,
sort of principles
very.
underpin your design.
Yeah.
A couple of things I wanted to touch on was, yes, you've got these design principles, and we'll talk about those a bit as well, but I guess I guess maybe you could you could maybe extrapolate on what are these principles and how did they derive and why are they important to have in the first place?
And anyone can kind of pick this up and do a little Google, but design principles are used by a lot of big organizations these days, and they give you a nice little measuring stick for making decisions around customer experiences. So similar to like a brand guideline, only helping you make some functional calls as well. So ours are simple, light, warm, inclusive, lasting. On the spot now, innovative, I think is the other one. And actually those help us then make decisions when we're designing things. We can ask ourselves, is this light or is this light? Is this innovative or is this innovative? Is this lasting or is this lasting? And lasting is a nod to the kaupapa design principles of the Maori people who talk about making sure that when you design with the whole environment in mind. And actually those are the best design principles, I think. If you're going to kind of go down a rabbit hole, looking at Indigenous design principles is a lovely way to start. It's about lensing your design in different ways to help you make the best decision.
And for the listening audience, we work with yourself, Sarah, and projects with ASB. And this is actually a project that the students have worked on, which was most interesting because a question that came up from some of the students' research initially in themselves going out there and speaking to end users of cards was why even have a card in today's context. Now you gained some really interesting insights from your customer insights.
We did, and it was one of those, and again, a really lovely example of the importance of context and environment. So when we briefed in our Australian MBA students and they did their research, I asked the question, did you actually speak to any local New Zealanders? Now they'd spoken to humans who have cards, but they hadn't spoken to humans who use cards in New Zealand. And actually the banking systems in New Zealand are different. A lot of small businesses in New Zealand still accept a plastic card. In fact, you can't even use PayWave. And they certainly don't have the ability for you to use your phone or your watch or some of these, fancier technologies that are in different parts of the world. And so it's not just about getting user feedback. It's also about being really cognizant of the environment that you're designing in. There's that lovely story that I think Stephen Johnson tells about the incubators that they took into developing countries, and these whiz-bang $35,000 machines, saved babies' lives until they stopped working. And there was no way to maintain them. And so actually when they went in and redesigned them using local parts, it was actually like Toyota parts and that sort of thing, and taught local people how to maintain the machines, they were able to develop a more sustainable solution. So again, navigating tensions, like it's one thing to get all the feedback in the world from a user who is using a product, but you've got to make sure that that's then contextualized for the environment that you're planning to use that product within.
Another really interesting insight you shared was that even though people may not all use the card they have, there was still a strong identity with having a card. I think that was a really interesting insight to perhaps marry with your functional reality that you pointed out, which is, yes, there must be one, but this idea is of, should you just be very specific to those that have the need and those that don't? The biodegradable aspect of it probably shifted their argument in terms of the, or it certainly addressed that insight. Addressed the insight.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because, and this as designers, we go in and we're seeking feedback and we're looking for insights, and sometimes the insights come from the most interesting conversations. They're not necessarily from deep quant. They're not necessarily from, just a really well-crafted qual. It can actually be from your field observations or from you kind of actually deriving insights as you've taken the time to look at all of those different aspects along the design process that you have kind of gathered, if you like. And I like to think of it as like, the gold rush. You're there kind of mining for those gold nuggets, and you're trying to sort of sift through to sort of go, what is that thing that's going to kind of stand out and really help us design something that's different and that's innovative and that's going to meet the customer's needs. And I think that is why it does need to be iterative. You can't just keep pushing through a process and deliver, because you miss that opportunity to reflect. You miss that opportunity to kind of go back and to seek to understand on a deeper level. And that's why I talk about wonder mindset, because for me, wonder is that active curiosity. It's not a sort of passive state. It's something that you're doing and that you're taking the time to sort of reflect. And for me, design thinking is really important, design doing is really important, but actually that sense of wonder and curiosity around the process as you kind of step back and look at it and wait for those insights to sort of emerge is the most magical part of the whole experience.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that I wanted to capture from that discussion was this multi-method approach to gaining your data. So it's not just one thing. Depending on what you're looking for, and as you say, you're mining, you're looking for nuggets, and you'll learn over time what types of approaches work in terms of different types of audiences, and getting those things that people share that might not be evident to the group that's designing. It's a little bit similar to that marketing principle, that often your target market, you don't represent them, so you can't really communicate in the way that you want to be communicated to. You've got to learn about their particular identity and sense of engagement. So I guess another thing that I wanted to look at then was, so why is it so important today? I mean, the obvious seems to be that there's rapid change and what have you, but why would a large organization like the financial institutions, we see government organizations taking it on, some are in the embryonic stage, some of them organizations like yourself who get somebody like you that come into that process. What did you jump into? Like what was the impetus, and what have you jumped into, and how have you found your space in the organization?
I think the why today is because humans are evolving, whether we're aware of it or not. Oh, I think I cut out for a second. I think the why today is people are changing. I even see the way my children think, and it's just an inevitable kind of evolution that happens from generation to generation. And so you can't just design based off old data. You do have to take the time to connect in and to understand the times. And we've just done some really fantastic research on 18 to 24s in New Zealand, and actually uncovering, there are certain phases within one's life that sort of remain true regardless of what period you're in. But the time that we're in right now, there's a hyperconnectivity, there's an intensity to the whole life experience right now. And so really humans are looking for different things. They're looking for help, and they're looking for assistance in making good decisions, and they're looking to discover more about themselves. And there's a curiosity, and there's so much choice in front of them. There is less stigmatism around a lot of stuff that used to kind of be not okay, and that's a good thing, but it's also a really overwhelming thing. And so I think things like this process really give us an opportunity to sort of think about how we're going to navigate through that with, like you said, lots of different tools to help us kind of make sense of things. And as you know, like when you're in a design process, that sense making is such an important part of the experience. As you go through, you take the time to do the pit stop and to do the sense making, and to allow those kind of insights to come through. And if organizations can do that for our people, then that's going to help everyone. We can actually have a positive impact on society, because we can take the time to understand what's really going on, understand the pain points that people are really leaning into right now, and then design products and services that are more than just about meeting that need, but that can actually have a positive impact on society. And I think the thing I'm most excited about is, I don't work in an evil bank. I work in a bank that has purpose and heart and is looking to improve the financial well-being of all New Zealanders, and that's an exceptional thing. And we've got real guts behind that. We are doing research to understand the housing crisis and understand how we can help New Zealanders get into homes, and we're doing research to understand why there's a gap with women and wealth, and how we can kind of design products and services to help there. So I think it's a number of different things, but that kind of sums it up. Complex world, big organizations have, I think, the resource to kind of do that synthesizing and to then create those insights and to help make people a bit more aware and give them better choices.
Fantastic. So with the change in terms of, I guess, what's happening existentially, but where people are at in terms of their mindset and what is important in terms of society. And you mentioned that with the rise of the purpose-oriented organization, that this design creates a medium through which that can be addressed from within the organization by reaching out to their stakeholders. And I think the other thing, and this is something I love about your philosophy of design thinking, is it's not just applied sort of externally to self, but it's also something that you can utilize in your own life. Or I know, as you have, in terms of you've got this this new project, She Evolves, which is assisting empowerment of women. I mean, you can perhaps elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, I try and apply the design thinking process to everything in my life, whether that's parenting or with my kids. And, you know, I've run really fun parenting projects with the kids over the years. We've written a book using design thinking. We've produced biodegradable glitter, which went on Kickstarter. Like, for me, it's this lovely, endless kind of scaffolding for change, which is fantastic. The recent project for me was, and I deliberated on this for a while because I've produced some big events in the past, and I have done a women's only event, and I was like, is it meant to be women's only? And where I sort of landed was that it is meant to be women's only. There's for now, we'll do a radically inclusive event at some stage, but wanted to bring together a really diverse group of women to get them to experience a design process for life, and to actually think about the sort of change or complexity that they're seeking to lean into, and then surround them with experts and people that they can sort of tap into to get inspiration. You know, the IDEO kind of inspiration, ideation sort of process, those 3 I's, which is a slightly modified, I suppose, approach to the double diamond that you and I love so very much, I think can be applied to help people reimagine their retirement or reimagine how they want to live. You know, I think a lot of people just kind of pick up the blueprint and just run with it rather than actually taking the time to do an HCD on yourself, like really kind of mine in and understand, like, who are you and what do you stand for and what are your values and what are the juicy gold nuggets or insights that you could design around in terms of your kind of hopes and dreams. So I love the idea of kind of that. And then there's a lovely community in Fiji. You know, Fiji is still a third world country in many ways, but there's an amazing kind of bubbling aspiration for women in leadership there. So we've got an opportunity to also connect in with other women from all walks of life and sort of play together, which I think is going to be really special.
Fantastic. I think you've chosen a great place to go to. And I think you did, as you mentioned, you're going to include local women as well. So it's again, it's got this purpose that is, you know, you work in a purpose-oriented organization, but it's become purpose-oriented because society has become. So at the self level, and I think you mentioned, you know, we all deal through life, which is a bumpy road, many, many challenges. The more tools we have that we can utilize, so we stand back from the experience that we're in and use some skills and do so collectively. And that's the other thing about design thinking. It's about having diverse lens. So I've found it fascinating that a number of psychologists have gravitated towards it as well, because it really is another way of tapping into psychology that's not linear. It's not about sitting down and just listening to a story and then providing a response to. It's sort of getting a lot of data, reimagining what the challenge might be from what that data tells you, and then looking at possibilities. And I love your idea of wonder and wonder, which is, you know, it's this magic wand type of idea. What if there are no limitations on possibilities? And that just takes us back to childhood, when it was all about imagine possibility, you know.
Imagine. And, you know, we stopped that. I always used to laugh. I'd give people magic in a workshop. I'd say, you know, if I give you a magic wand right now, tell me like 5 ideas. And they'd always start with these really basic Betty ideas. And I'm like, come on, I just gave you magic. Like, this is a big waste. You need to kind of get wild here. And we try to do it with our kids, because like we've noticed, you know, they say childhood, slowly your brain gets sewed up or something horrific like that. And it sort of is a little. We do design challenges with the kids on a regular, just to make sure that they are exercising their creativity and thinking wild about things. And we've actually got them a challenge at the moment. We've got this, we call it the magic school bus. We've got a Tesla because I'm big on that, but we've also got the magic school bus. And the magic school bus is this old beat up van, and we're going to let them design and get that painted for Christmas, just as a bit of fun and an opportunity to kind of express their creativity. Because I just think you've got to real world it, you know, and this is why, like, you and I had so much fun on the component of the micro-credential that we did, because it, for me, represented real worlding. You know, anyone can think about stuff. How do you take those thoughts and actually start to prototype them out and make them real, and see something visible at the end of that you can actually, you know, get inspiration from, to know that you did that and that you took something all the way through to delivery. So that there's something kind of magic in that space.
And Sarah, we then move from this is fantastic, the immersion in possibility. How do we then marry that with I guess, the agenda of the organization? So I think in a previous conversation, I'd asked you this question, how do you make sure that this has primacy, say, with the CEO? This has got some sort of return on value. It's not something that would be a project that has a limited time but can be bumped because, maybe because there are other people with more impressive figures. What's your approach to that?
Well, it is, the risk is that some of this stuff, because it looks fun and some of it can be quite fun, is that it can come across as being quite self-indulgent. It's kind of like the so what of sitting there and percolating in customer feedback. Like, unless you take action on the customer feedback, why did you ask? Is sort of that energy. And so the tension for us to navigate is very much between spending time in that possibility space, connecting with insight, really understanding customer, empathizing deeply, thinking of possibilities, but then also taking that through to the real world and doing that in a way that aligns to strategy. And for me, that's just about lensing again. Like, if you can get really clear on who you're there to serve, how you're going to show up, you can start to sort of join the dots as you kind of go. And it can be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet that you sort of start with, like, all of your crazy wild ideas. And then as you start to sort of sift through them, you can then go through and actually go, well, of these, like, which ones would actually help us achieve our strategy? That can just be a question that you ask. And that simple lensing can then help kind of bring that business energy to what it is that you're doing. And you'd be surprised how many wild ideas actually can connect through to strategy when you take the time to understand, the need that it's meeting for a customer, and how that kind of ladders up or eventually kind of aligns to your bigger purpose. So I think that is, it's about kind of pulling things through a pipeline. You start with lots of crazy wild ideas. You lens them as you go through for feasibility, viability, desirability, alignment to strategy and purpose. And then you absolutely have to bring them to life, because otherwise you are just a design thinker. You're
not a design doer.
And I don't think that we should get allergic to design doing, because that's actually the change we're making in the world. That's where we're putting one step in front of the other, and we're prototyping and we're playing and we're bringing possibilities to life. So
do you feel that the proof's in sort of the eating, so to speak, the proof's in the pudding delivered and then tasted, and this is a sense of, yes, this is something that's an output that can be measured within the organization?
Yeah, and it could be as simple as a story. Like, I think sometimes people get so caught up in, like, how are you going to measure this? Well, if it makes the front page of the paper, that's a measure. That's sort of helped people understand. If you've been able to tell a story and make a video about something, then that's a story. So I've sort of challenged the team to think differently about what measurement is and how we measure impact beyond just, NPS, which is really super important, or EMPS, or even our brand and reputation scores. These are all really important, and absolutely we can measure those and we should measure those, but not getting kind of lost outside of the importance of thinking about the story as well.
And what about careers in design thinking? Because clearly you've found your niche there. I remember you told me you started out, you're in I think it was the Commonwealth Bank, and you learnt the skill, and then that assisted you to develop that and take you on a journey.
Yep. So we were taken to UTS as part of an executive, like it was an executive in design thinking, and we were taught by someone from D School in Stanford and an artist. And that lovely kind of pairing of someone who was like, professor and the artist was for me just like this perfect introduction into design thinking. And we took it back into the organization and started playing with this new process for thinking of innovative solutions and coming up with new ways of doing things. And it was hard. It was really hard to begin with, because we'd found this new way of thinking about things and we were getting quite playful. And then you kind of hit up against the DNA of the organization. So over the years, playing with this whole push-pull of design thinking has been a really amazing journey for me. And I think the ripeness and richness of now running a fully fledged kind of design thinking practice is quite extraordinary. I've got researchers and service designers and UI UX designers and process designers and, you know, an HCD design thinking specialist and all sorts of, you know, there's 44 people there that are all focused on designing for the organization and improving the customer experience, which is just extraordinary. Back then, like, I'm now in the position of dreams, you know, and we sat there and we kind of imagined out what if the CEO valued design? What if you were able to have a team of designers that could all kind of work on these things? So I think the thing is, you know, if you can dream it, it can be done. I'm a big believer in writing your own job description, and I've done that a few times, and I've actually recently nudged a few people in my team to do the same, because if you see a need in a business, frame it, you know, bring it to life, use your design thinking skills to actually show where that can add value and prototype it out and see what can happen. I prototyped out my role as the, you know, entrepreneur at CommBank, then running Wired for Wonder and using design thinking to bring that program to life. So yeah, it's sort of using that creativity to unleash business value, which.
And it's a fantastic story. And that is a story that I'm hearing more and more from graduates who go through the course and those that gravitate towards design thinking. So one actually got into the community and was sort of advised to connect on, you know, Twitter and sort of really, I guess, be a bit of a thought leader, and then was able to get a position, transferred from hospitality, was then doing their MBA program, and then ended up as quite a senior person in NAB Labs. And then from there just elevated to head of that position, and since then has moved on elsewhere. But, you know, like ASB, a big team of people. Even in the construction industry, we've got partners in architectural design or engineering design that now have their own specialized design thinking folks. So what I'm hearing is more and more it's competitive advantage, because it's a different way to design, and it fits with what we know. Government money is big money in terms of major infrastructure and the like, and purpose orientation is right behind a lot of their policy initiatives in terms of designing for, you know, people who are marginalized or disadvantaged, or certainly making those stories that you talk about. And so I think that's one of the really interesting things that I picked up from what you were saying there, was this idea of not only reimagining what the position could be and how you could find a space in the organization, but reimagine for the organization how to tell their story, how to add value, rather than just look at the current metrics and say, well, that's where it must fit, because that's really looking backwards, not looking forward.
Totally. And, you know, at its best, design thinking is an end-to-end vehicle. Like, it goes right from problem definition all the way to business value. You can take it all the way through to delivery. And so, you know, in small businesses, not just big businesses, like if you only have one person, get a design thinker who can take something all the way through to a prototype and iterate and help you evolve it to a point. And maybe then you bring in funding or expertise or whatever it is that you kind of need. But yeah, it's a pretty handy skill set.
Absolutely. And we're thrilled to be working with you. So Sarah works with us each time the course is run. So we've got an industry partner there, and you've had a career in Australia, now in New Zealand. So we're getting multiple perspectives. And this is what we're doing through the MBA program. So in design thinking, we did similar in marketing, and we're moving to do similar in business consulting, is working with industry, which creates real problems for people to sort of get involved in. So just for those who are listening, in terms of where this fits within the program, as I said, it's in the early stage. In the first stage, we've got, we start off with 4 core courses in design thinking, marketing. We've got leadership, and we've also got like a financial accounting course there. And so that's where it fits. And there is a minor, and that minor, as we mentioned, that Sarah helped us to create, really adds value to the design thinking that is done as a core course. It then unpacks that at a deeper level by looking at the process in the design thinking, discover and define, and the develop and deliver courses. They're really unpacking deeply that insight part and making sure that the problem is fully understood and reframed. And then the second of those, the develop and deliver course, is really much more about then how you reimagine possibility, as Sarah was referring to, in terms of starting to think very expansively. And then you've got criteria that then narrows that down into ultimately landing on a prototype, and that becomes an iterative process. So it's really a deeper level of expertise in the design thinking process. And then we add to that a futures thinking in design course, and that's really gained prominence since the COVID-19, because as you'll know, with COVID-19, so many things occurred all of a sudden and there was no scenario. So part of design thinking is also this ability to then look at this futures thinking perspective and say, well, how do we engage in scenario planning so that we risk manage our organization? And we do so in advance, so we're really prepared for worst case and best case scenarios. And the digital entrepreneurship then puts that around that set of tools around, similar to what Sarah was saying, intrapreneurship or entrepreneurship, whether it's internally within the organization or on a project that you have that's your own entrepreneurial project that you can bring to that particular course. So that sort of gives you an idea of the structure. As you'll find out, the MBA program is rather neat in that runs 6 teaching periods throughout the year. And that enables students to manage one course at a time throughout the year and complete, 6 over a 12-month period. Some students engage in more than one, but that's certainly how it was initiated. We certainly found during the last couple of years, more students started engaging in more than one, and it was probably because they were sitting at home with plenty of time to occupy, or not too many distractions. But that's certainly the process there, and that enables a clear focus on each particular course as it's undertaken. So the design thinking minor gives you a minor specialization, and there are 3 other minors within the program. So that gives you a bit of an idea about the structure of the course. And I might hand you back to Fern, who will give you some further information. Thanks, Sarah.
Absolute pleasure.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kevin and Sarah. I think you've definitely got me engaged in learning more about design thinking. And even, I guess, as an organization that's in its infancy with design thinking, what would you say is where do you start? How do you start in involving design thinking processes in the mix?
I always like starting with a design jam, and there's some fantastic templates on things like Miro or Figma now that you can actually just pick up, dust off and give a go. And I think like giving it a go is like really important, because you learn so much as you go through the process. So, knowing that it'll be a bit clunky helps you kind of go in with a growth mindset. So you're like, I'm not a design thinking expert yet, but I'm giving it a go, and sort of starting there, because once you've been through one cycle, you sort of gain confidence and start to realize what you might do differently next time, how you might approach the problem space or the territory, or who you kind of need to do. But my advice is always just get started. What about you, Kevin?
Look, I think because it's a mindset, I think there's something to be said for understanding what it is, but then just doing it, because a lot of our education, early education, is very much about rational thinking and very much doing things and analyzing them. When you get involved, and I've been involved in the education side of this to be able to teach it as well, and it's very different to just sit down and read about something to then do something. So when you're asked to go through a process and you suspend your usual modus of addressing innovation, which can be much more about being judgmental, for example, if that's your inclination. And this is much more tools with rules, so that it's very democratic in terms of its process. So it's don't question, just put up your ideas, and to do so rapidly, and there's no discussion, there's silence. So you have a sense of more voices coming forward. You can address the side of it as, does it fit within parameters later, but it's fascinating what comes out. But I do believe, I agree with you, by doing it, you start to realize, actually, I can rationalize that I'm a changing individual, but until I go through that and some of the frustration, I don't then realize what's on the other side. So that immersion is a big part of it. And our students do find that too. It's it's initially a little bit challenging, but they're guided by their their tutor through that process. And I think, and they work together collectively and they share and reflect on some of those learnings. And I've sat in on student panels after they've done the course, and some of them will say, I wouldn't have been the sort of person to sort of get in with this group of folk and start doing this stuff. I'd normally sit back from the sides, but people jumped in, I jumped in, and I learned so much about myself through doing that.
Love that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I love that idea as well about inviting people who normally wouldn't play in that space, more consider themselves probably more, I guess, logically minded as opposed to creative, but creativity can come in any form, right? So having that diversity, you're going to get, I guess, amazing ideas and things that, you haven't thought of before. So yeah.
I think it's the process. If you use the process, and I think this is where Sarah's a really good exponent of this, because Sarah has she's had a lot of experience, but she brings a sense of excitement and possibility and shares some very relatable examples. And I think that then invites people to sort of take steps. And I imagine, what do you do with your team, Sarah, when you're sort of getting people to be involved? I imagine you don't jump in on the heavy part of the project straight away.
I don't now, right? I'm leading leaders, and so actually it's different because I'm now leading a group of design thinking leaders, and so for me, I've noticed actually a lot of my time is spent scaffolding their well-being, because I have a really firm belief that a well designer is a great designer. I talk about self-location before you start, because you bring into a design process whatever you're carrying. If you've got bias, you're going to bring in bias. If you're not feeling great, you're not going to see the stuff that you need to see. And so I kind of like starting with a full tank. And so I actually try to create an environment where people are kind of ready to design and spend time doing that. And then it's about kind of scaffolding their curiosity, making sure that they feel aware of self. We do a lot of kind of self-location when it comes to self-directed leadership. I'm a big fan of that. Lots of kind of understanding here first, so that we can then go in and hold space for the design process, which is like I said, a bit of a shift. If I'm running a design workshop, I absolutely have a whole kit of tools, and I kind of like going into it not knowing where it's going to go, because I love reading the energy of the group and being able to kind of know as an experienced facilitator now, okay, right, I've done this recently. I'm like, right, everybody stand up. We're going for a walk, and we are going to go into like 4 businesses and just talk to them. And they're like, oh my God, what are we doing? And, that pattern disruption helps kind of loosen things up. And then suddenly you've got this new source of inspiration and people start note taking. And then when you go back and do a reflection session, they're in the room in a different way. And so, you may pull out something that sort of feels relevant or timely to the particular group or scenario that you're in. And I like being surprised by wherever I end up taking people to. It's like that lovely sort of fun that you can have in the process.
Fantastic.
Right, we might open up the
room. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, what was that, Sarah?
We've got one question sitting in the Q&A.
Oh, yeah, brilliant. Are the design thinking subjects offered outside the MBA course?
Well, that's a good question, isn't it? Look, currently the design thinking course is part of the MBA. There is also a graduate certificate, which is part of the MBA as the first stage, which is fairly typical of a master's program. So it can be done as part of 4 courses, but not as just a one-off, unless somebody was in another program, for example, and was looking for an elective within that particular program. But that would need to be a postgrad program that is aligned and got approval for electives within, I would say, within the College of Business and Law.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kevin. I think we've just had another one come through. And this one, Harvey, if you're on the call as our student enrollment advisor, you might be able to help out with. How many hours will I need to study a week in the MBA program?
Hi, thank you for your insights, Sarah and Kevin. It has always been a pleasure speaking with you guys. If you don't know me, guys, I'm a senior program lead for the MBA program at RMIT Online. Just wanted to let you know that it depends from person to person, but more importantly, it depends from the phase of your studies. For example, when you get started, you're curious, you want to learn more. You know, I personally have studied as well. So you like spending about 18 hours a week for the first week. But then it is so user friendly that you are literally spending about 13 to 15 hours on an average every week. This program is designed for people with with a full-time job so that they can earn their bread and butter, spend their life. YOLO, of course, you only live once. So, we got to probably respect that. And Kevin has taken all of that into consideration and developed the program. So yeah, I would probably recommend about 13 to 15 hours a week in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Thanks, Avi. We've got another question that's come through. Is design thinking related with human-centered design? So this one's probably for you, Kevin and Sarah.
Look, it's basically one of the same things. So human-centered design is really another way of articulating design thinking. So as I see it, I mean, they're both really different terms that say you put the humans you're designing for at the center of the design process. So we very much lean on, academically, the human-centered design approach, as opposed to just running with a set of tools and getting people using the tools, because as clearly Sarah's articulated, if you don't have deep insights about the people you're designing for, you're really not going to provide something of value. And that's really the, look, it's really interesting. I remember talking to somebody that was head of design thinking at NAB Labs, and she had a marketing background like myself. And what she really loved about the human-centered design or design thinking toolkit was that it really provided tools for a team to innovate that are better than some of the tools in the marketing kit. So marketing is a complete process that's got a range of tools. I think the design thinking was much more inclusive because it didn't scare people away by saying you engage in deep, consumer insight through conducting research. It used terms like empathy as an approach. So even the methods and what have you weren't using academic terminology. So when I first came across it, I thought, oh, this is really what we do in say marketing and product innovation. It's got some neat tools and some better rules around it, and it's much more inclusive. And so we find folk that come from engineering backgrounds or hospitality or wherever they come from into the program, and they all embrace it. Whereas I found in the past, if you tried to embrace it from much more, we conduct some research over here, and then we that didn't seem to be incredibly inclusive, or it didn't seem to relate to what they would be doing. Whereas I think, Sarah, have you found that design thinking or human-centered design has certainly, because it's come across as new, more frequent or more recent language, that people seem to have embraced it as something that's for everyone?
Definitely. And the coolest thing about it is that it's an accidental culture program because of exactly what we've just said there. It provides a really lovely watering hole for people to kind of come together from different disciplines, from different walks of life, and to connect around a problem and to then kind of take it through to solutions. So we think of it as a really radically inclusive tool that also unleashes collaboration and culture, which is a lovely thing too. Fantastic.
Got another question here. Do you both have any recommendations for reading and learning more about design thinking?
I love Think Like a Rocket Scientist. I think that's such a fact, and that's probably because my interest is always in like how you really get things kind of going and take it through that iterative prototyping, and Thinking Like a Rocket Scientist is, you may have like 10 failed launches that you have to just keep going back in and refining and moving a centimeter here or a millimeter there to really kind of get it right. And it's that kind of obsessive, iteration that I just absolutely love. What about you, Kevin?
Yeah, look, maybe that's one that we could probably pin a couple of recommendations for students in feedback for those who have attended the session. It might be useful because I don't think there's just one particular key source, but I think it probably needs to be something that's a little bit accessible. And there are a couple of resources that are not lengthy reads that I think do showcase the process quite neatly. So I'll have a think about that. I don't want to scare anyone with anything that's a bit too academic and thick. So thinking like a rocket scientist might be useful.
It's a fun one. It's a, you can even get that on Headway, or one of those kind of easy listening kind of audio type tools, which is quite cool.
Brilliant. We've got another question here that's program related. Are there any exams in the MBA program?
No, we don't even, we have very few exams now, even in the face-to-face environment. Look, authentic assessment is really the way forward in education. So you'll find exams, except maybe in a law program where there's a particular requirement for accreditation for the degree, where a particular exam is still required. But apart from that, you'll find that universities are basically moving away from exams. Certainly in the College of Business and Law we are, and in the MBA program, we don't have exams as such. I mean, the research on exams does tend to show that people tend to cram somewhat, and then they get quite a bit of knowledge fresh, but they then tend to lose that quite quickly. Whereas if you have projects that you work on, whether they're reflective pieces or they're report-based pieces or they're other forms of assessment, the more authentic they are, the more relatable they are to your lived experience, relatable to what you do in the workplace, the more value you'll get out of it. So no, we don't do exams. Exams is sort of like 1950s.
just brings back anxious memories of sweating in large halls, doesn't it?
Yes, indeed. I think that's a really cruel way to sort of, nerve people out. And of course, a lot of exams had about a 50% weighting too. It just seemed to be a lot resting on a small amount of time rather than, the sort of relatable, authentic learning that people could have.
So in place of exams, what are the type of assessments that students would do? And I guess, is there a level of real world application, with students taking what they're learning and applying that in a real workplace setting?
Yeah, so like sort of the design thinking course. So, one of the assessment pieces is a little bit what Sarah was talking about, that early part of the process where you basically undertake some investigation. So you gather some, you do a bit of research, and so that's really then putting some data together. Now, that could be a combination of data that comes from the industry partners, say from Sarah's side, and then the what you add to that. And that could be one particular piece. And then the next will then be starting to work that design thinking process further in terms of, reimagining what the problem is that you're designing for and going through an ideation process. And then the final assessment might be basically refining your ideas down to an ultimate prototype and delivering that prototype. So that's an example in the design thinking course. Other courses have different types of assessments. One form of assessment that you will find more readily in programs generally, and we certainly have in ours, is a reflective piece. So that is actually not only reflecting on what you learned, but how that might be relatable to how you would take that into the workplace. So that's really then that translation piece for individuals. One of the assessments that I remember creating some years ago that we heard some great feedback from was people doing their own personal branding action plan. So that's one done in the marketing course, and we've got a personal branding elective as well. And that's really interesting because people then map out what they would do for the promotion of themselves, which marries to what Sarah was saying about design your own where you want to be. So if you, and I've had students who've come back to me and said, this was amazing. I went for a job. I was the least experienced. I got the job. I asked them why they gave me the job. And they use that artifact as part of that process. So they aligned where they wanted to be with the project in that particular job they were going for. And that was seen to be utilizing their MBA in a way that was highly constructive and valued. They had less experience, but they showed they had a process that they could bring that the organization valued. And similar with things like design thinking, you've got real artifacts and demonstration. And if you've worked with, say, like Sarah on that credit card project, you've got a story to tell. That's more interesting than saying, I did some Harvard case study on some big Google company or whatever that I'm never going to work for, or probably have very little relationship to. I've actually done something quite real that might impact purpose orientation in my organization, or innovation in some way about a product, a service, a process, a policy, whatever it might be.
Brilliant. We're almost sitting on 6:30, so we'll try and get in one more question. We've got one here. Can I get into the program if I don't have an undergraduate degree?
Yes, you can. Absolutely. Yes. So we have a criteria around experience. So if you've had work experience, so if you didn't have an undergraduate degree, but you were just straight out of university, you wouldn't qualify for an MBA. But if you've had a few years in the workforce, then you just utilize that as part of your entry process. So there's two pathways. There's basically what we call pathway number one for those people who already have a prior business qualification. And for anyone that doesn't, it includes those that have got other degrees that are non-business. We call it non-cognate, but just basically means it's not aligned with the particular qualification, or you've had a number of years experience in the workplace. You can apply on that basis. So I think that's the lovely thing about postgraduate education, is that it values people's experience coming into the program.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Kevin. I think that's all we've got time for today. Really, my apologies if we weren't able to get to your question, but please feel free to reach out to our student enrollment team. Got the details up on the screen there. Just want to say a big thank you, Kevin and Sarah, for leading today's discussion. Really appreciate you taking the time and sharing kind of your learned experience and seeing your passion for this space. It's very much appreciated. So thanks to all of you for joining us today, and hope you have a nice rest of your evening.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Fern. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
All right, guys, stay warm.
Thanks, Sarah.